What's up there, guys? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Rick, this is Fanfare for the Conscious, and welcome to Friday Night Live. Today we're going to be talking about language, and I'm going to be starting the stream today just with a reading from George Orwell's 1984. I picked up this book near the beginning of this whole debacle, you might want to call it, the crisis. The beginning of the tyranny and the lies, I suppose. And there was a part on language which really rang quite true to me, and something that I wanted to bring to your attention this evening. I'm hopefully going to be joined by, at the very least, Gary Mead, and hopefully maybe even Mark Slate as well. We have been having some issues with connectivity this evening, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to work with that and just try and do my best. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly share a little something with you. Just get this screen up for you. And we allow that. Cool. And we'll give you that. So let's split this a little bit. There we are. So I'm not sure how well you guys can read that. Let's zoom in a little bit more. I'm just going to skip down to the section that I needed. Bear with me one moment. It's page 28. Fantastic. I'm pretty sure now. I think it was chapter 3 actually. Yes, it was around here somewhere. Bear with me one moment. Like I say, it's been a little bit chaotic this evening trying to get everything sorted. I've not even been able to have my dinner, which has arrived a little bit late, so everything's just a little bit last moment this evening. So this is a very interesting book anyway, and I suggest that anybody who hasn't actually taken the time to read it should do so, because it feels like I'm almost living it at the moment. And there's a type of language which is talked about in 1984 called Newspeak. And Newspeak is a language that was invented by the party. And the party is like the authority in 1984. And there's numerous purposes. It's actually in chapter 5, so you have to bear with me one second, guys. So the party invent this form of language which is intended to actually help manipulate the populace in terms of the way they're able to think, in the concepts that they're even able to conceive of in sense whatsoever. And it's quite disturbing, this little section that I'm going to read for you now, and we're just coming up to it. There we are. Okay. So I'm going to start here. This is the 11th edition, is the definitive edition. We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else. When we've finished with it, people like you will have to learn it all over again. I dare say that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We're destroying words. Scores of them, hundreds of them every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone. The 11th edition won't contain a single word that will become obsolete before the year 2050. It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great weights and adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that can be got rid of as well. It's not only the synonyms, there are also the antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like ungood? Will do just as well. Better, because it's an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague and useless words like excellent and splendid and all the rest of them? Plus good covers the meaning, or double plus good if you want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there'll be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, 1 word, Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? It was BB's idea originally, of course. You haven't a real appreciation, you speak, Winston, he said almost sadly. Even when you write it, you're still thinking, I've read those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. In your heart, you prefer to stick to old speak with all its vagueness and its useless shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty of words. Don't you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose language vocabulary gets smaller every year? Winston did know that, of course. That the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought. In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all subsidiary meanings rubbed out and frozen. Already in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point, but the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Even now, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be need even for that. The revolution will be complete. The language is perfect. Newspeak is Ingsoc, and Ingsoc is Newspeak, he added, with a sort of mythical satisfaction. Has it ever occurred to you, Winston, by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation we are having now? And I'm going to leave it at that. I could read a little bit further, but I just thought that made a very appropriate opening to the discussion as we're going to be having it this evening. And I thought it'd be a really good jumping off point. I'm going to see if we've got Gary Mead. I can see him in the background. I can actually see Mark there as well briefly for a moment. So there is some progress being made. I think Gary might be on audio at the very least. Let's have a look and see if we can get him on the stream with us.
Yep, I'm both. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Gary. Thank you very much, mate, for joining me. How are you doing?
Sure.
Are you doing well?
Another day.
Are we going to be getting you on camera at some point, or are you just on audio this evening? I mean, it's fine either way. It doesn't matter to me. I'd just like to have another voice to...
Well, I'm outside having a smoke at the moment. You don't...
Well, that's absolutely fine, mate. You take your time and you do what you need to do. I'm going to see if this has just gone live on Facebook as well. Yeah, there we are. I'm just going to share this one about and see if we can get a few more people in here. It's looking a little bit empty this evening. Mark's having some issues. He's just messaged me through Facebook Messenger. So, I mean, have you read 1984? Do you have an understanding of Newspeak? I mean, what do you think of what I've just opened there, that passage?
I'll give you a little background. So, I didn't read any of the books they told us to read in school. Did I lose you?
No, not at all. I'm just muting my mic to make sure you're not coming through to everybody else twice.
So, I'm familiar with 1984 and the concept. I'm familiar with Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and the concepts there. I often thought that if you threw them both in the same room and locked them together, it would be a very interesting. Well, actually, you're seeing what that combination actually are, because we have way too many choices to the point of inaction, and we have this dumbing down and thievery of the language. So yeah, no, I see it. I've seen it for a long time.
Yeah, and I can. The thing that really sort of resonated with me about this passage is that this thing I've talked about before, which is this idea of the destruction of nuance. In that rather than actually eliminating the words, what has happened in society is a whole bunch of words have been considered to mean effectively the same thing without any understanding being held of the subtle differences between them.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I've said this before. A lot of people, when you use certain words, they attach many other words to the same concept without, again, like I say, recognizing those subtle differences. And again, I think that necessarily limits your thought. One thing we used to talk a lot about in education was this thing called emotional literacy, which is being able to, you know, recognize what emotion you're feeling, and in broader strokes than just more detailed than just good or bad. Do you know what I mean? You be able to tell the difference between I might have to mute you a second there, Gary. To be able to know the difference between like anger and frustration and ambivalence and, you know, caring versus loving versus liking, and all being interested in something, being excited by something, being scared by something, and being able to tell the subtle differences between all those different emotions. And that requires having the vocabulary to express them. If you don't know that there's different words for a reason and they have subtly different meanings, then you're not able to recognize those subtle differences in, you know, for example, your emotions or any other concept.
I agree. So the world would be a pretty boring place if the only thing on the prairie was that prairie rose, you know, or the only kind of tree was a pine tree. You know, there are many reasons to have what we have, and art and literature are kind of perfect examples of that. You know, without them, what would life be?
Yeah, for sure. And again, like sort of coming on to that, really, like there's been a general devaluement, I think, of arts in general in society. Like particularly recently, there's been a whole like advertisement campaign where the government is encouraging all those who are in the performing arts to go and get a proper job, basically. And it's like, what on earth do you think you're trying to do? Like, it's so obvious social engineering that we've got going on in the world right now. And you know, sort of to try and tie it back to the whole subject here, I think a lot of that is rooted in language in itself, right?
Yeah.
And like that's been one of the sort of the main things, really. I think that the establishment, if you want to call them that, I prefer to call them the parasites, have used as a tool over all these years to manipulate us on this sort of subtle level, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to some of the very early works of man, when it talks about morals and the versions of the Bibles are good examples of this, because there are different versions of the Bibles and each use certain different words which have different meanings. You know, there's a difference between the Geneva Bible and the King James Bible. There are different word usages in them, and they have different meanings. It's right now doing the work that we're doing. It's really important that this is the stuff that we're looking at specifically, because this has been the vehicle. You know, this has been the method for that. That whole, really just a usurping of everything that makes us living beings. You know, we have the gift of communication. You know, we have written language, and we have discernment, we have memory, and we have imagination, and we have discernment. And it's really important to really be fully who we are and fully present with the language that we have to use to communicate with. I think I've articulated that very clearly and without ulterior motive. So, you know, I generally try not to read into things, read into what people say to me. But any contract that you look at nowadays, if you have a discerning eye, you can tell pretty much kind of what the hidden intents are and where the hooks are. So it's just important now because they're landmines. You know, they're landmines that we end up tripping over because we don't recognize them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it gets a little bit more ingrained in that as well, because people have been encouraged to see certain words as trigger words for emotional reaction, shuts down debate and reasoned discussion, and that, I think, has been one of the biggest barriers to communication. I mean, even between people in the quote-unquote truth. It's been, you can find it quite difficult to really get into any discussion of how we go about sorting this shit out without saying some word that someone that you're talking to is going to have a bad emotional reaction to, and then refuse to engage you any further, right?
Well, yeah. If you look at what do they call it? Political correctness. You look at what has happened to stand-up comedy. You know, you look at what's happened in films and television. There's this underlying push to really kind of step on brash, crass discussions, and you know, it's really all about people's feelings nowadays instead of the actual facts. Yeah, we're looking at some really ugly people that are pushing a pretty ugly and oppressive narrative, and you know, stand-up comedy was one of the last bastions of free speech and political commentary. So when George Carlin checked out, you know, you look at what's out there now. You go shut down all your subscriptions on YouTube, reset your history, clear your history, and then go to trending and see what's on YouTube nowadays. And it's remarkable what garbage is out there. It's just garbage. It's all garbage. And that's my opinion, but I certainly don't subscribe to any of it because it's devoid of really anything of substance. It's just surface nonsense. Again, my opinion.
You know what, Gary? I can totally agree with you on that one. There's so much, and YouTube used to be like thick with interesting things. You know, I remember browsing YouTube like maybe 10 years ago, and you know, you couldn't fail but trip over interesting things, and it's kind of gone the way of mainstream television, whereby, you know, again, the last bastions of mainstream television for me were like the Discovery Channel and music channels, and that was about it. But even then, they went garbage in the end. And you know, you're starting to get this infiltration now into places like YouTube as well, which is again why I think you're starting to see a lot of other competing platforms now, which are gaining some measure of success. And not just brand YouTube and BitChute. You've got Library as well, and you know, a few others that I can't even think of off the top of my head. But you know, I think the people are starting to speak in some sense, even if we're not doing it in a more organized fashion. We're starting to vote with our wallets and our time a little bit more, I think, which is, you know, generally a step in the right direction. Anyway,
so yeah, go ahead.
Go on. No, if you're going to say something, Gary.
No, you're spot on. It's we have to, whatever we do, whether we try and muscle it out in their realms and subscribing to their little rules for living. There are people that are really good at kind of circumnavigating that nonsense and remaining on those platforms because they phrase things in honor. They do things in honor in a way that really, if for them to actually shut you down would be really for them to point to the fact that they are really nefarious and really malignant. And so some people have maintained their standing on YouTube and Parler and Gab because they show up with facts and they do it in honor, and they're not, I have a hard time with like patriotic movement because it screams the opposite of their polarization. You know what I mean? I'm not a patriot per se. I'm just a man, and I'm witness to just crimes and fraud taking place. And I keep it that simple. I recognize the breakdown of the communication in language, and I've come to really focus on being a good wordsmith and speaking to the facts and keeping my emotion out of it, because how I feel really is not relevant. It's what I do and how I set my intentions.
Yeah, I think to a broad extent, what you feel about a given situation is irrelevant. Besides feeling that what you're doing is right and feeling that it is aligned with your personal path. Does that make sense? Like anything beyond that is irrelevant. Like it doesn't matter whether something offends you or you find it distasteful, provided you are acting in a manner that is aligned personally with your own sense of what morality is, and you're acting in line with your energy, then with that caveat aside, what you feel about something is irrelevant.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Like, Bobby, come on, it's time to wake up. You have to go to school, and by the way, the house is on fire. Oh, but Mom, I don't want to get up, and I don't. If you realize that your house is on fire, your feelings in that really don't matter. There's an issue that needs to be addressed, and you need to put that stuff aside and just deal with the facts and deal with the problem at hand.
And again, like coming back to language and logic, the biggest problem we've got is, again, like you say, there's these words that have been tainted, and you can't say government around a lot of people now because they're stuck with this idea that it means mind control. When ultimately we can choose to define that word differently as a group, and all you need to do is change the syntax of your understanding, and there's plenty of languages that read syntax oppositely to English, and rather than mind control, it's control via mind. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, it does, and I like the term self-governance. Versus sure. Because it has a different inflection, and it speaks to something very directly and very specific. When you mention self-governance to somebody, you're showing them an idea that's different from the word government, because that has its own connotation. It's been drummed into us over time. And it's what has been hidden in that word and its usage is an implied a lording over rather than what it's actually supposed to be, which is, yes, so government is mind control. And if you don't have control over your own thoughts, somebody's gonna, somebody's gonna step into the gap and fill in the blanks for you, whatever blanks they want to put in there.
Well, again, like I say, I like to consider the process of mind, which is not just like a personal thinking. It's a meeting of minds. It's not a debate. It's both people trying to come to a common understanding about something from their different perspectives within the universe. Does that make sense? And for me, that's the way that thought works within your own mind. You know, if you're thinking about something, then you're either replaying a series of events, which I suppose I consider to be like there's some sort of trauma going on there that you're trying to deal with. But when you're thinking in terms of problem solving, you're weighing options, you're looking at different opinions and pitting them against each other in order to come to some sort of conclusion about the way you need to act. And that's what should play out in what we would describe as a sort of a lawful government, right? That same process of all opinions being considered and sort of consolidated into an action.
Well, yeah, I mean, governance. Okay, so there's more than just the gray matter in our head that I attribute to mind.
Yeah, for sure.
I believe wholeheartedly that the heart has a mind as well, and the soil upon which we stand has its own. And when we're in communion or actual communication with all that is around us, then A, we have a better relationship with all of it, and B, we're more receptive to the nonsense that's being played out. If you do an etymological search for the word Babel, like the Tower of Babel, you'll see its origins. You'll see what those root words came from and what they actually mean. And it's a confusion of tones. You know, when you think about when you think about Babylon itself, it was, you know, the gate of God. But it was confused. It was a confusion of sounds, and ours is really the job of kind of clearing the air and filtering out what's garbage, and
yeah,
you know, just trying to speak from the heart and from, you know, reason and common sense and what's natural. Again, my opinion.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read through the post that I've put up on Lawful Bank. For anybody who does actually want to get involved in the conversation, rather than just typing in response to this video, there is a website that we use. I'll put links in the eventual YouTube video when I've edited it up and it's on there in its final form. You can actually forums and join in the discussion themselves. I'll actually put together a post which was used as the basis. And one of the things that I covered in it was the whole idea of language itself being something that is present in nature, that you can consider language and that communication between various different parts of the material universe to be evidence of like the very basic part of life, right? Is the universe talking to itself, to, you know, one element of the universe receiving information from another element of the universe and then changing its behavior because of that.
No, agreed. So
yeah.
I am on Lawful Bank right now. Did you create a forum or a thread, and where is it?
It's in branches. If you go up to the top, I'm going to screen share it for you. Let's have a little Lawful Bank lesson.
Okay.
Yeah. let's have this. Let's put this. Love this. I hope he's watching the stream. Right. Here's our Lawful Bank. If you go up, it's the second one across. If you click on branch over there, and it actually for me it pops right near the top. Fanfare for branches. Second one down. I've not put a head on it yet. Well, this will be our discussion group. There's video title suggestions there, but if you look up discussions there, that gives you this post. It's about 1,800 words thereabouts. So, I mean, like 10, 15 minutes of reading maybe, because you can't really speed read it. It's quite dense in terms of information and concepts. But I'll see if I can find the the quote here. Yeah, we're talking about logic as being a type of language, and logic is something that nature just does by itself. So if organisms communicate with their environment, they sense it, they measure it, a condition with an if statement to it in terms of their needs. If hungry, find food. The basic impulse of life in one very simple statement. It sounds fairly reductionist on the surface, but you'd be extremely amazed to see the levels of complexity which can come out of very simple rules. For those in doubt, take some time to research the idea of swarm intelligence or look at a flock of birds in flight. So, yeah, that's where I was kind of trying to tap into this idea that language is there within nature, that nature operates on principles of mathematics and logic, and from very simple rules you can get this amazing complexity which can appear almost random at times.
Yeah, so I did read the excerpt that you sent me via email prior to coming on the call, and I still have a little bit of a difficult time navigating over Unlawful Bank, but you've seen from the work that I've put up there, I have my own little loop that I've figured out, but I don't spend a lot of time digging through branches, and I will definitely find that because I want that to be showing up in my feed on a daily basis. So I think I have to actually subscribe to it, so it does.
Yeah. Well, my idea is I'm trying to tie a few different platforms together, because lawful bank's a really important part of what I'm trying to achieve. It's my home base. If everything else goes to pot, I know that all my work is still there. There's still some, I get booted off YouTube, I get booted off Facebook. That run YouTube and BitChute won't take me anymore. I know at the very least I've still got Lawful Bank, where I can communicate with the people who matter, and where the work that I've put in, it will remain as long as we keep paying for it.
Same here, brother. I've been trying to get them to put up a PayPal link or something so I can make a donation. That's my last bastion of free speech too.
Well, I've got that and along with that, I've actually got a WordPress blog which I'm going to use to again try and draw people in with more of a sort of a pretty shop front. Because as much as I love Lawful Bank, it needs some tarting up and a little bit of makeup putting on it and a nice dress, and so I go and take her out, meet my friends.
Yeah. I was trying to get some people over there to help polish that up. Also, keep in mind, we can try and put that Podbean account that I purchased to some good use, because I think that's a fairly open opportunity. Do a little research on it.
Yeah, for sure. I'll figure some way of tying that into this whole thing as well. But my plan going forward is to have a post which is going to form the basis of these conversations that we'll be having on the live streams. That post is going to be mirrored over onto my WordPress, where very, very soon I'll have an ability to take donations from people who appreciate my work and want to support me. I will be giving some of that to Lawful Bank when we have an ability to transfer some money to Paul Rogers over there, who's working in the back office and we don't see much of at the shop front. But he is, maintaining the SSL certificates and all the rest of that, and making sure it's all paid for. So the man does need compensating, but I want to give people a chance to more directly support me. And then, obviously I will in turn support Lawful Bank directly because it is an important platform and we need to keep going. However, again, having this nice shop front, I think, to mirror these blog posts over, referencing them all back to Lawful Bank, so those who want to actually talk to me about the ideas and want to, dig into the details and become part of this with me, they can actually, join in with the discussion. They can reply to the post, give me their own take on how things are going, and start to build a real community here, because that's what's important. And when it comes to the branches, they don't have to be geographical communities. There's all sorts of different sort of communities we can put together on there. People who are passionate about certain specific parts of either dealing with the fraud or building, our own system better, that is the area to do it. That branch network, I'm just going to quickly share it again so I can start pointing at things, and people can figure out what it is I'm talking about. Yeah, this up here, this brand section, we can create all our own communities. They don't just have to be your geographical communities. They can be an interest community. So there is a fanfare for the consciousness community for anyone who wants to be involved.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Keep it going.
So, what other things did I discuss on here? What we need to have, it seems to me, is that there has to be some form of common vocabulary that we can all be agreed on. And people who, whenever you're listening to someone talk, as much as, yes, you do need to be aware of these legalese words, which, can get you in trouble in the wrong context, registrations and understandings and all that sort of thing. I think a lot of people just start applying that brute force to everything. I've had people pull me up for using the word in casual conversation, and I kind of have to do a double take, like, what do you think I'm trying to contract with you? Are you serious? And sometimes take a step back. Not everybody who uses the word understand is trying to get you to accept their authority. Sometimes they're just trying to see if you comprehend what they're saying.
Right. Yeah, I don't like the word contract. People would approach me, "Are you a contractor?" And my response was always no. I said the first syllable in that word is a negative connotation to it, and I don't engage it.
Yeah. Well, it's like cryptocurrency, isn't it?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's a dead end. I like Anna's article about what money really is, and as far as I'm concerned, I think she's spot on, and that is, love is a currency. The things that motivate us, to spend our time, our energy, our resources, the things that the compassion really comes out of us in action form. That's our commodity. That's how we spend our time. We're here stuck in this time realm. So how we conduct ourselves in that is really motivated by our currency, whatever it is, whether it's greed or whether it's love, or whether it's fear or apathy.
And again, there's sort of like a lot of the complaints I've heard from people when I've tried to discuss the idea of us sort of sorting our own mess out, has been that a lot of people got this idea that human beings are sort of selfish by their very nature, and that I don't think there's any actual evidence for that, because you're raising human beings in this system, and I know from my life experience that people behave according to the rules of the game, or there's certain things outside human nature that affect the way people behave in society. And you can't look at people who have been raised in a profoundly sick society and say that that's human nature.
Well, that's it. I mean, you used a great phrase there. I think it was Krishnamurti that said, being well, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. That's spot on. I don't liken my my current demeanor as something that's adjusted to the society that we live in. My whole existence is in stark contrast to it, because I recognize it for what it is. I exist. I live in spite of it. I live in defiance of it, and I live under duress to it.
Yeah, no, I can totally get on board with that. Totally get on board with that. It's amazing, as much as my life got harder when I started just sort of standing up and not worrying about what people thought about me when I spoke the truth. As much as it got harder on so many levels, it also got easier on other levels. It felt like I was just being real for the first time in my life. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm out of alignment. Sure, I've got damn sight less money than I used to have, and I sometimes struggle to deal with the weight of the task that I'm starting to try and take on here, with bringing people to an awareness of how we get out of this mess. That on that level it's gotten harder, but my day-to-day experience of life feels so much better for being true and not just going along with bullshit because it's what I'm expected to do.
Yeah. That's perfect. So, when I look at,
I don't carry that sort of like daily resentment anymore.
Yeah. When you're telling somebody the truth and they feel like you're attacking them, it's so telling of that whole mechanism that has been used. What is it? When you live in a world filled with deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. When people respond to you pointing out the fact that the emperor wears no clothes in a hostile manner, when people respond to you just stating the obvious, it's almost as if they don't want to wake up, or they don't want to be caught anywhere near you while you're attempting to wake them up, so they don't get kind of wrapped up in a what was that? What's a guilty by association kind of scenario? Like I don't care. I don't care what people think. I don't care what people believe. I don't really care too much about people's feelings, although I don't go out of my way to hurt them. But I'm not going to censor myself, and I'm not going to hide from reality. These things are happening. I want to live in peace. I've wanted to live in peace for a very long time. So when I recognize that a whole mechanism is waging war on that, I'm not going to mince words about it.
No. Well, it's it's same. Again, coming back to language now, there's a lot of very interesting words that have been used to make certain things sound prettier than they actually are, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, sometimes you just got to call something what it is, haven't you?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes something is just like, you can call it refusing treatment, you can call it refusing access, but to essential services. But what is that really? It's murder, isn't it? Let's just be honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depraved.
Am I the only one to point out that elephant's there?
Yeah.
There's an elephant.
There's a big elephant
there. But yeah, there's all sorts of language issues. Like, what's the one that I chuckled from, back in the time when the second Iraq War happened, when Britain and America went all gung ho into into Iraq. That was described as a preemptive war, wasn't it? Preemptive war, right? Sure, that's just an invasion, isn't it? Right? Let's be honest.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was signed
You're
up.
not worried someone's going to kick your ass that you then go and punch them first.
Yeah.
Surely that's just initiating hostilities, right?
I wasn't a fan of the executive authority in that, and I got out of the National Guard right before that broke out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I mean, like, how can you say that you're defending the nation when you're like a good few thousand miles away on someone else's soil? Like, I'm not sure how you justify that, really. Like, I don't care what they're threatening. Like, you just defend your borders. Don't do you know what I mean? Like, it's not your business to have boots on the ground in someone else's country. It's just not the way it should be done.
Nope, you're absolutely right. When they declare things,
Unless they're like open invasionary hostilities, do you know what I mean? If they're like Nazi Germany storming around the world, like invading everybody, then sure. But like, if they're within their own borders, then there's no reason you should be putting your nation's forces on their soil.
absolutely. Unless, so when we have things like NATO and we have things like, when you have a small country that's being attacked by a regime, there's some merit to stepping in and helping. But when that stuff is mechanized and really just tall tales are told about why we're there, then it's all garbage. So, when we look at Trump trying to pull everybody back and kind of circle the ranks and really taking care of, like, all countries really should be able to maintain their own sense of self, at the local level. And even in the local neighborhoods, those things should be happening as well. So there's a lot of reversals that have to take place everywhere. We're trying to set an example. You guys are trying to set an example. There's a lot of pushback against it, but the reality is there's no need for any of that stuff that they've been pushing. All of that just stems from greed and domination, and it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They're bullies. They're just bullies, and when you recognize that there's a bully and there's some leaders in that group, you walk up to them and you stand them up and you square them off and you punch them in the nose. And then that's what you have to do, because having a passive approach really it's not effective, because those things they don't deter those kinds of people. Just speaking to the facts isn't enough sometimes. Sometimes you have to walk up to them squarely and punch them in the face, whether that's, dropping a rod of God on their little dominion and basically unseating them from power permanently, or whether it's imposing sanctions on them. Trump did a lot to really kind of reel things back in, and that's, you look at all the stupid language they use, like there's a national emergency. Well, what nation are you referring to? Connecticut? Maine? Because they're all nation states. So yeah. Are you declaring a countrywide emergency? Oh, well, here's the problem with that. We haven't declared an emergency. You folks and the corporations have. Let's get that out in the open. Let's look at the fact that you guys don't have valid charters anymore. Let's make that the public discussion right now, because those are the facts.
Well, I mean, okay, let's talk about the scam with the way that they've pulled off this scam. So we're talking about language here, and this has all been wordplay, hasn't it? Effectively, they've used language to tie us up in knots by making us think we are things that we're not. Right?
Yeah. So I just put together a 45-pager over the last 2 days. And
wow.
Yeah.
You've been hard at work.
Well, it's something I needed to do for my assembly, but it's something that really, if I were to compile all of my writings about this stuff, it would probably, at this point, it would probably be about 250 pages. But it speaks to the facts. It speaks to the contracts. It speaks to etymological meanings of words and historical events that have taken place, and a timeline that really kind of point to how things have unfolded, who was responsible for them, what their motives were, and what the ultimate aim is. When you look at, I hear the term, looking at things from a 40,000 foot altitude, bigger picture, because you see you see more of the scope of things, and you see more of the timeline of things as well. When you look at it that way, and you've already kind of severed yourself from a lot of the tethers that have you hooked into their system, and you don't have a lot left to lose, you can be generally honest with people without being without bludgeoning people with it. You just show them the facts. So this 45 pager that I've put together is really just showing my assembly folks the facts so that they have something they can throw in a 3-ring binder and just keep with them and add to it. Once you see it in black and white on paper, it disempowers it. You know what I mean? Once you reveal the symbolism behind stuff, it disempowers those who empower their symbols with their hidden words and hidden meanings and such. So that's my approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's recognizing what jurisdiction you're dealing with in a lot of cases, isn't it? When it comes to actually tidying up this mess, when you're dealing with one of these corporate entities, like one of the first things you've got to recognize is what jurisdiction they're claiming, and then know the associated language of that jurisdiction. Correct?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. There's when you have land, air, and water that you're looking at in terms of the separate jurisdictions.
So air is municipal, correct?
Air is ecclesiastical. It's a lot of contract and language law. There's patents,
but that's tied to municipal and directly to Rome, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah. So there, remember we're talking about the Venn diagrams.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes you're dealing with 2 separate jurisdictions at the same time, and that's when a Venn diagram would apply for that specific. So there's land and sea interaction. So
in this Venn diagram, would the 3 circles be side by side? Or is there ever any point where land, sea, and air all overlap to produce like a...
Well, again, all visuals like that, they're not exact. They're kind of references and allusions too. Those are study tools. But when you look at land law, it is very different than maritime admiralty law, special admiralty stuff. People live on the land, with very few exceptions. There are some seafaring people that were born at sea, on floating islands, and they have those are they're exceptions to the general rules. But land law is very different than contract law and ecclesiastical stuff. But all
say that because they've kind of got us convinced that we were born on floating islands, haven't they?
Well, I mean, that's because they threw the placenta. That's because they threw the placenta into the mix. You can thank the really weird people that lived way back when superstition was part of things. When you see a placenta coming out of a mother with a child being born into this world, and they don't know what it is. They think it's a stillbirth from another, offspring, and they create contracts and estates based on that thing, but they never tell anybody about it. That's what's been playing out for many, many, many years. And you think about that story on the surface, and you're like, how bizarre is that? But sure enough, that's, it's, these things are unspeakable.
So that is the evil twin, isn't it? Is that the scam?
I don't think it's I don't think it was based on an evil twin. I think it was your elder sibling who died at birth, and so the estate that was set up was you'd have to read the articles about that specifically. If you go to the site and read the articles on the Dogon tribes and the Tale of Ingratitude, it's an interesting read. But if you study that culture too, you'll learn the story of what that's all about. I mean, the tree of life and the really what that thing looks like with all the veins on it. I mean, you can see where these ideas came from and how they were put out.
Yeah.
Again, another example would be looking at the all-seeing eye or the Wiedjet eye, the Egyptian Wiedjet eye. It's basically
the eye of Ra.
Yeah, if you were to cut a brain in half and look at the center mass of it, you see the pineal gland and you see all that stuff, and they're formed the same way. So yes, they used to pull bodies apart and look at what made us tick as a species.
Oh, been doing that for a long time, though, hasn't it? Like, that was one of Da Vinci's tricks, wasn't it, for having his amazing anatomical correctness in his drawings, was that he literally studied dead bodies, didn't he? He studied the musculature of it and all of that.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I had a copy of I had a pocket version of Da Vinci's notebooks, and I actually studied the Vitruvian drawing for years, in parallel with the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and they are definitely superimposed on one another. And they're patterned after the same principles. And man, for the couple of years I spent really digging into the art and the geometry of all that stuff, I couldn't even begin to describe what was revealed to me and all that. The man was brilliant, and those people back then.
Well, he was also very connected as well, wasn't he?
What's that?
He was very connected to the ancient mystery schools as well, Da Vinci, wasn't he?
He may have been. Again, history is, written in pages, and that really speaks to the people that wrote those pages. So I honestly don't know, unless I were able to transport myself back in time and witness things directly. I take everything I come across with a grain of salt, except for what I can confirm myself. Through the use of those tools, through drawing, through, studying leaves or studying stars, things that I can verify myself.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So let's just pick a little something else from this article, just to try and get us back a little bit closer to the ideas of language. What did you think about the whole comparison to DNA and language as a form of sort of informational DNA, so to speak?
Well, right. Well, what I know about DNA is that it's information, but it's information that has receptors. And those receptors they're responsive to frequency. And generally the frequency is your emotional state, your state of being, your level of health. And the higher your vibration, the more of those. If you look at a very high frequency sine wave, you have a lot of peaks and valleys, versus a low frequency, you have a low number of peaks and valleys. Well, at every intersect point where it crosses the DNA strand, those are nodal points and they're receptors. The more of those things that are interacted with, the more your DNA is activated, the more your immune system is activated, the more of you is actually engaged in the process of self-generation and regeneration. So if you're living in fear, you're aging. You're reversing your growth. You're decaying. You're in atrophy. But if you live in a higher vibration and calm and peaceful manner, your DNA is going to respond to that, and you'll have a better opportunity of healing things quicker and having a stronger immune system. And yes, there's importance of getting some good sunlight and UV and taking your vitamin D and getting good nutrients, but having a great attitude and not being in stress and in fear is critical to health.
Yeah, for sure. I was more trying to get round to the idea that DNA is a way that nature communicates information to the next generation, right? That's how the instruction manual of how to build a man, a woman, is passed on. It's like it's a packet of information which, when interpreted correctly, allows the creation of a living being, right?
Well, yeah.
So it's a concept that is it's transferred by the information rather than the whole thing being transmitted. You're not transmitting a whole human being from one generation to the next, but what you're transmitting is the information that allows that thing to happen. I think when you use information, when using language in conversation, that's a very, very similar process. I can't take what is in my head, in my mind, pull it out, put it in a ball and stuff it into your head. There has to be some sort of intermediary between that. I have to transmit the information that allows you to recreate that concept within your own mind. And that's what language, for me in that context at least, is. It's like that sort of verbal DNA or that written DNA or that symbolic DNA that allows the communication of, in the same way DNA allows the transmission of the information of how to create a certain protein, for example, from one being to another, that a sentence or a book or whatever can contain all the information required for someone to recreate an idea that was born in someone else's mind. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I just like to try and find, and again, this is sort of tied back to the fundamental principles of the universe. Like, you've got to see this where, as you say, nature it's not wasteful. It likes to reuse concepts. When they work, like, they just get regurgitated and reimagined, and it's the same thing with a slightly different flavor or a slightly different expression, but it's the same basic concept. You're able to, DNA is almost like a language. Logic is almost like a language. Mathematics is a language, and music is a language. They're all ways of communicating things from one being to another without taking the actual, thing itself and moving it. It allows it to be recreated elsewhere.
Yeah, it's like, so if you have an idea you want to hand off to a builder, the best way to do it is to hand it off on blueprints. That blueprint's going to have a lot of different layers depending on the system that's part of that whole. So you're going to have like a 12-page print of everything from foundation forms to ridge caps on the roof and everything in between. Because things have to happen that way, because we're such complex beings, there are many different all right, so because there are many different systems in a body that make it work. I was looking at something earlier today, and it spawned the subject of, sometimes there's just too much information. There are too many principles involved, and there's too many opinions involved, and it makes for movement, any kind of growth or movement, almost impossible. So there are some fundamental principles, a very small handful of them, that make all others possible. But you have to deal with those first, and those have to have integrity. Let's take the idea of the rainbow. It's an infinite spectrum of color, but there's some foundational primary and secondary colors that make up the colors of a rainbow. And then you have your extremes at both ends. The lunatics of the world are at both extremes right now. They're trying to embrace every aspect of every facet of every color part of the spectrum, and bringing that forward and that specific forward, that special interest group forward, and jockeying for position. And it'd be like orange arguing with green, which was more important. And, trying to get half of the color spectrum to boot, one of them out, and, the other one trying to get half of the spectrum to boot the other color out. Well, it's not going to work. That'll never work, for the same reason that people are people. We're all created equal. And the less we try and create special interest groups where they need to be, when they start calling certain aspects of society underserved, that's for political bias and manipulation of funds and a leveling of power and a disempowering of everybody overall, because that's their motive. Take the power away from everybody and dispense it evenly at their discretion. No, thank you. I yield.
No, for sure. I can totally get on board with what you're getting at there. Again, like, divisions are useful, but only as far as they are useful. There's points when you're splitting hairs, and if you can divide, like you'd say, the idea with the rainbow, you can divide the rainbow up into 7 colors if you want. But again, you have to realize that the yellowest red and the reddest yellow are going to be nigh on indistinguishable from each other. And, so that division is only useful insofar that it is practical, right? Once you start taking those divisions and making them all that matter, then you start to lose the flexibility of all the nuance of, for example, a language.
Right. So they want to standardize things where there should be individualized care. It's like healthcare. Healthcare is it's unique to the individual, and it's unique to the relationship between the physician and the person who needs to be returned to whole health. Standardizing that is ridiculous. It doesn't work because we're all different. And in another vein, they want to diversify things that should be standardized. So if you look at it like, look, I think it's important to spend liberally on conservative values, and there's a reason for that, because the universe and nature is very conservative. Mm-hmm. Nothing goes to waste. All can be used for good. But therein lies the rub. When I decide to use the word good, somebody wants to pick up on the other half of that and say, well, what's its opposite? And that goes to pillar and post discussions. That goes to black and white thinking and polarized discussions. And that just kind of meets a dead end or a gridlock. It's an impasse. Mm-hmm. It's a trick. And I choose to walk around it or walk straight through it. You remember where I am right now, right, brother? You know the roof up on it. So, I'm right in the thick of it with my whip of cords saying, no. And here's why. Because at the end of the day, real charity is love. It's compassion. It's not a 501(c)(3). It's not any of that crap. It is what it is. And, your actions show better than your words. Or your bank statement or your investments or any of that stuff. It's what you do with yourself and what sacrifices you actually have made.
Yeah, for sure. I don't really I don't really believe in charity in terms of donations. I believe in actually going out and doing it yourself. Like, if you want to go and make a difference, you actually go out and make a difference in someone's life, because so many of these charities they're corporations, aren't they? They're rites of passage for great big corporate interests whose CEOs are on at the very least 3-figure salaries. So you're right. Charity is love, and it's care, isn't it? And it's care for those around you and those within your community, whatever that community looks like.
Yeah.
And it's being willing to sort of give that to anybody who, regardless of any moral issues aside, like, provided they're a good person, nothing else should really matter in terms of your willingness to give that charity.
Right. Well, so I'll use myself as an example. I like people from a distance. Now this is a hard-won experience here. I grew up in the cities. I grew up in valleys. I grew up in not always great environments, situations. So I like people when they're a little bit out of a distance from me, but also being kind to one another and not actively trying to destroy themselves or each other. So I like, I kind of want to be out in the sticks. I've been looking for that for a long time. Not too far from a general store and not too far from society that I'm completely removed from it. But I'm one of those people that has gotten to this place where I kind of want to be somewhat removed from society in order to come to love it a little bit better, for what it really is. We're all trying to have this experience that we're having, and for all the challenges that it poses right now. I think the number of people that are genuinely decent people that want to see a better world far outweigh the handful that are just trying to dominate it all. And I liken those people to being very confused about the grand scheme of things. I don't subscribe to any survival of the fittest as if we're animals. I think we were meant for something better than that.
Yeah, and this. I'm glad you brought up the whole idea of survival of the fittest, because this is again another way where the language has been manipulated, isn't it? It's been taken out of context. Because if you want to understand what Darwin meant when he said the survival of the most fit, then you've got to look at what the Victorian definition of what fit meant, and they used the word fit in terms of a jigsaw piece fitting.
Right.
It wasn't this idea of like physical fitness and strength. It was, the one that fit its environment best, the one that adapted best to the conditions in which it found itself. And, that's what fitness is. It's not, the one with the biggest stick. Because if the lion that goes out and kills all the antelope will soon starve, surely.
So you're familiar with the term. So here's when you get to this place and you hear
nature finds a balance. Do you know what I mean? It's not about just going and beating everything over the head with a big stick. That's not how it works.
So like some of the weapons that are used nowadays are and they're words that are being used, and they're words that are kind of spawned from memetics and like social media, just the phrase "learn to code." You heard the phrase "learn to code." It's insult. It's an insult, basically. And it speaks to people in a way that, well, you're inept, you're incompetent at what you do, so you should just learn to code and move into another realm. And part of that is about kind of survival of the fittest in those online arguments. Well, yeah. People have become so kind of word warfare violent when it comes to, and you see this happening with kids. I mean, kids are committing suicide from things that are said on social media. It's heart-wrenching it's heart-wrenching to see children so caught up in things emotionally that that's what's happening. So I think people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and You know, people like Jeff Bezos, who owns and allows the nonsense coming out of Washington Post to continue. I think they all should be in jail. Clearly, I mean, and it has everything to do with really just a, what's the word I'm looking for? Depraved indifference.
Yeah.
You can't look at the scenario.
I'm all right.
Yeah,
mentality.
You can't look at the scenarios that are unfolding and remove yourself from culpability from it. To whom much is given, much is expected. And I firmly believe that. It's one of the reasons why I wake up every day and I continue moving forward with this work, because A, I was given a lot, and B, I got nothing else to do, brother. This is what I got, you know? So I'm not out in the woods building a hobbit house away from everybody. I'm right in the thick of it doing this work.
Yeah, because you realize that it's essential to get it done, because even if you have got a hobbit house out in the middle of nowhere, that's not going to protect you, is it?
No, the bad Ewoks in the world will find me.
Yeah, and like one of the phrases that I've been, sort of repeating a lot recently is this whole idea of, those who behave like sheep will be eaten by wolves.
Yep.
And that's that people have got to realize that you can't just go along with what everybody else is doing because everybody else is doing it, because you find yourself walking off a cliff with the rest of the herd, or right into the abattoir, and you won't even realize that it's done it, that that's where you were going. You've got to take some responsibility for yourself and look at where things are heading. And language is one of the big weapons that's been used a lot recently. People who are standing up to a lot of the nonsense in the world, by refusing to go along with a lot of the diktats that are being pushed, are being described as selfish. And like the least selfish people, they're putting themselves in front, for ridicule in front of everybody, to stand up for what's right. These people are not the ones who are being selfish. The people who are going along with things just for the sake of an easy life are the ones who are being selfish.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. On top, so overlaying all that is this very, it's not even subtle anymore. It's a very overt psyop. And it utilizes modern day mental health gymnastics, like psychology and psychiatry. Those mechanisms are being used as weapons to turn people against each other. And if you have any back knowledge of that stuff, I mean, I could test out of a psychology course. I could probably get my doctor in it today because I grew up with that upbringing. I understand how those mechanisms work. So to see it being played out as a means of warfare, pitting one special interest group against another, and then like you have all these different groups of people that now are separated instead of all Americans being unified as one governing body, trying to take their country back, or all people over in the UK, or people of the, what I mean? It's a divide and conquer thing, and it's a cancer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I've seen in the last 18 months, like literally all the tactics that have ever been used to oppress and manipulate a populace have been thrown into this great big cauldron that we've called 2020 and the beginning of 2021 and mixed up together. I mean,
You just went mute.
Right, I should be back now.
There you are. Yep, I hear. There you are.
Yeah. What was I up to before I cut out? My apologies. It just likes to do that for some reason. If I change the mic very quickly, it
Roll
comes
it back 5 seconds.
So it's just I've seen like all of the tactics just being brought together, and there's elements of fascism here, there's elements of communism here, there's elements of MK Ultra trauma programming, you've got neuro-linguistic programming, you've got problem reaction solution, Hegelian dialectics. It's literally all the tactics that they've ever used in any of these psyops, all rolled into one and mixed up in this great big cauldron. It's how people are unable to see all these elements being played out is just beyond me. And the symbolism is even there. I'm not sure if you've got this lanyard system over in America, but there's green lanyards you can get over in Britain, which are supposed to indicate to staff in shops, etc., that you are exempt from wearing a face covering. And do you know what is featured on these green lanyards?
Star of David. What?
It's a yellow sunflower.
Yeah.
How more blatant can you get with this blooming symbology? Like, it would only be more blatant if they put a Star of David on it. That'd be the only thing more blatant.
Yeah. So everything they do now is a remake. You know.
Yeah.
It's been said that the devil never had an original idea, and I kind of believe that. Yeah, I don't wear signs. I don't join groups. I don't do colors, because all of those things really just kind of put you into, if you were to try and put me into any category, I would fit in probably 30 or 40 different categories. So then at that point, which one do I actually belong in? So stop trying to put me in a category, because that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I had an incident. Well, I won't say it's an incident. I commented on something on someone's social media post the other day, and the response to them was, "I thought you were supposed to be anti-establishment, Rick. Shouldn't you be giving a bit more credence to this?" And my response was like, "But I'm not. I'm pro-truth. If that happens to make me anti-establishment in certain cases, then fine. But that's not the defining characteristic here. The defining characteristic is that I'm pro-truth. I don't have to oppose the establishment just because it's the establishment. I oppose the establishment because it's right to do it." Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, I've had friends, tell me after they've witnessed an exchange between myself and someone else on like Facebook. I've had those friends tell me, "You threw away a friendship," and blah, 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 blah. And I said, "No, I didn't throw away anything. I refuse to allow somebody to put me in a box because they're closed-minded."
Yeah.
And even those friends just refused to see things that way. I lost a lot of friends in the last couple of years. And a lot of it had to do with people unwilling to look at what's happening right now and to step up and take action. Because their inability or unwillingness to do that is just making it harder for the rest of us who are.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, self-governance is just that. And if we're not doing it, the things that they still have access to, they're going to lose. At the end of the day, they're going to lose it. You know, it just hasn't reached them yet.
Yeah, everyone's going to be in the firing line eventually, and those who think they're not are completely delusional. They really are.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to stop at the, you know, the people who are at the bottom of the ladder at the minute who are, you know, desperate. They're going to just make more people desperate, and more people will end up in the firing line. And this whole idea of the Great Reset, I'm just going to touch on it briefly. I mean, I heard it described that they're trying to bring the wages of the middle class down to the point where they're basically the same as the working class.
Right.
So that we're all, you know, going to end up in the same boat eventually. Because that's the majority of the population of the planet, isn't it? If you're trying to sort of divide it into income streams, it's the working class and the middle class, for sure, right?
Yeah, so classism.
Again, not that I believe in them, but as useful definitions of income brackets, taking it as far as that and nothing else, yeah. I could describe it another way in terms of income streams, but do you know what I mean? Say people who earn sub 100 grand a year, you know, converted into American or whatever, like that's most of the population of the planet, surely.
Yeah, I don't. So
you're talking like 99% of the population of the planet is probably earning under that sort of money.
Yeah. You know how they got away with that? They got away from the word income and they started using capital gains. There are a lot of loopholes. You know how everybody was like they're pushing.
Your company can buy things that you just happen to be in possession of, can't they?
Yeah. So when they were attacking Donald Trump about, you know, showing his income taxes and and they kept using the word income taxes. And what they refused to say out loud was that they all benefit from writing off their stuff and using the term capital gains on their own stuff, and none of them were willing to put their income taxes up either. But Donald Trump prepays a lot of his stuff, and that stuff was shown. It did come to light, but the guy is also in the middle of an audit all the time. So it's not as easy as they were. It's such nonsense. But in terms of classes, like middle class, what do you call that? What do you call that bottom spectrum? Low class? What? What do you call those upper people? High class? What? So you have a middle class, and why do we refer to these people that are above middle class, upper class? Why even have a class system at all? The reality,
for sure.
The people that built this country are blue collar workers. You know, the captains of industry, the self-appointed magnates of industry,
So what you guys call blue collar is what we would call working class, I believe.
Yeah,
that's like
absolutely
your mechanics, your farmers, the people who, you know, do the real labor of the world, I suppose.
Yeah. And you look at the idea.
And be like your management business, for sure, right?
So they have, you know, this whole discussion of you have all these mass migrant caravans approaching the border at the beginning of Trump's administration, and that whole political theater. And I heard an old veteran say it very clearly. There's a big difference between the immigrants that actually built the infrastructure in this country and the ones that are showing up now looking for a welfare ticket or ways to actually undermine our Republican form of government and force us into a communist capitalist democracy that's on the verge of collapse right now. Huge difference, huge difference. And at this point, it's a very different world. So you can't view it really the same way anyway. What's happened over the last 244 years in terms of what was built here, half of it needs to be dismantled because half of it's garbage. Half of it turned our landscape into this disgusting looking strip mall after strip mall.
You know, we've turned into the world's flea market parking lot, and everybody dumps their garbage here. And that's not what was intended. Never was the intention here. So people need to kind of
and that sort of brings us to the whole rise of corporatism there, though, doesn't it? Because that's what's destroyed the life of average, your average man and woman. Has been the rise of the corporations, which have siphoned the wealth and the land and the productivity and everything else away from the people at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a new spelling for that word, corporatism.
Go on.
Well, I'm sure you can spell it out. Corpsism.
Yeah. Well, I've used that breakdown of the word corporation before, haven't I? Which is dead speak.
But
because to orate is to talk about something, and corp is dead.
Yeah, that's part of that.
Means a body, not like a lifeless body, right?
Part of that 45 pager. there's a basic intro to a screenplay called Zombies, and it's not like I think I mentioned this last time with you. It's not the people walking around wearing masks, although they are infected in the brain. It's the corporate zombies. It's these lifeless, soulless corporations that are just profit driven at the expense of everything natural, everything living.
But that's it. They're monsters because they have all the rights of a living being, but they have no soul, and their only goal, and it's written into their very charters themselves, is to make money for the shareholders. Right. That is literally, they're compelled to do it by law, to the point that the CEO can be taken to court by the shareholders if he doesn't absolutely pursue profit at the cost of everything else, right?
Right. But our pushback on that is this, they've made those things public and publicly traded companies. Yeah. You have people in society that are complicit in that because they're invested in it. So you have part of society invested in it, in its own demise. That's like, I don't know, engineering a version of the flu to get your immune system to attack part of itself. Yeah, it's actually a literal translation. You pit part of a body of people against itself, and really push the investment in that in your favor. So you can sit in the background and watch it all happen, and collapse it, and then reap the benefits of the land and soil assets, and not have to pay your actual debts.
Yeah. I suppose that's one way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's one of the big problems, isn't it, with the corporate system, is that the people who have the real power in a corporation aren't even the CEO. It's the shareholders, isn't it?
Yeah, it's usually the people in the background.
They have all of the power, but they have none of the responsibility. It's not the shareholders who get prosecuted when a company behaves badly. It's the CEO.
Right.
Surely
it's not usually people in the political seats that are the power holders either. It's usually people that have kind of positioned themselves near them. People like Edward Mandell House or Rasputin, or there's been lots of people in history that have gotten close to power but never really took a position of power. They just took a position of influence. It's the influencers of the world with selfish, nefarious ends and backdoor dealings with banks and popes and all that nonsense that really have made a big mess of things.
Yeah, they put other people in the limelight because they don't want to be exposed to it themselves in case they get exposed, right?
Right. And they hook those people into
British politics all the time. It's the backbenchers of the political parties, the ones whose names you don't hear, who only ever referred to as backbenchers, are the ones who are wielding the votes within that political sphere. Sorry.
Salute.
And they're the ones who are cracking the party whip, who are bringing everybody else into line. It's nothing to do with the person who's actually standing at the front of the party as the party head, or the president or the prime minister in most cases. It's the those at the back of the political party who are advising him and nudging them in the given directions, right?
Yeah, and usually they the term pound of flesh. The British pound sterling. That comes from compromising a political figure under contract, under penalty, and they had to do a dastardly deed and in front of witnesses to hold them to their oath to whatever backdoor deal they made. So they're afraid of exposure, so they do what they're told to do.
Yeah, and as much as we do hear these big names like Rothschild and Rockefeller and Morgan, I think a lot of the faces that you see, the people who are like the sort of the public front of these big corporations, that clearly near the upper echelons of this power system. If you're seeing their face, then they're probably not the ones wielding the real power in it. Correct? You there, Gary?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, can you repeat that last bit? You just went a little bit garbled.
Yeah. The people that we see, they do have some power, and they're compensated for their being compromised, so they get to live somewhat of a good life, but they're hollowed out.
Yeah.
They're compromised. They're hollowed out. You can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in their speech. You can see it in their body language. They're just hollowed out. And the ones that are very convincing are the ones that are really charismatic psychopaths.
Yeah. The ones who really don't have a soul to sell in the first place, right?
Yeah, but they're just as damaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just need to look at any of these political figures, anyone who gets into power, just watch how they age over their term. Honestly, watch them.
Quickly.
I remember, if you look at some of the pictures of Tony Blair when he first came into power versus when he left, and the man has aged 40 years in the time that he spent at the head of the Labour Party when they were in power. And it's amazing to see. You're right, these people get completely hollowed out because they know that they're completely controlled. There's nothing that they can independently do at that point.
They signed on for life.
And it's interesting when you actually look into where these politicians go after they've served their term, and they all end up as silent partners and on the board of some Saudi oil firm or some weapons manufacturer or some corporate bank or whatever. They'll get a 3-figure salary every year. They're just keeping your mouth shut, and that's your thanks for doing what we told you for however long you're in power, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of these politicians should have to wear the logos of all the companies that they're involved with. Like Formula One drivers, wear all the sponsors on the.
Yep, I've said that as well. You should be forced to wear all. First of all, they shouldn't any of them be receiving salaries. Because they all work for lobbyists, so all of their books should be open. All of their investments should be a matter of public record. The minute you take a public office, your life should be under a microscope. And that's the only thing that ever keep them honest.
you forfeit privacy to some extent.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, to the extent that it matters to the rest of the world, you can't have that. Like, if you're taking on that role of responsibility, you've got to be utterly transparent. Any potential conflict of interest have to be out there, and you've got to be aware of that in everything you do, for sure.
Yeah, and by the same token too, if we realize that everything is corporate and everything is driven by, you know, energy and economy and things of that nature, you really want to see the shrewd business practices of a businessman. You know, this country, America, actually needed a good businessman to step into the mix and fix things. That's the one thing that we, you know, a lot of us do recognize, is that because he's not part of that old boy network, and because he is a good businessman, and people will challenge that and say, well, he filed for bankruptcy a few times, and, you know, he's not, this thing failed and that thing failed. But the reality is, the guy did some really good things over the last 4 years that reined in a lot of really dangerous situations for not only this country, but for most other countries. The things that were on the horizon for many countries, if left unchecked, wouldn't have lasted much longer. You know, they had things planned out well in advance. Ask yourself why they built those ghost cities over in China. Those weren't just construction projects that you know were doomed to fail, and because of the economy they stopped. They built those things for a reason. And right now, as it stands, they would house about 30 million people.
Wow.
Yeah.
For context, that's almost half the population of Britain.
So you think about a long-term plan to, you know, as an insider here in America, to tank the economy, kill off all your priority creditors, you know, with whatever, and step away from it all for a period of time, and then swoop.
Well, it seems that China's about the only place they haven't bankrupted yet, right?
Right. Well, they're about to try and start doing that. The same thing with them, with the birth certificate scam that they did everywhere else. You know, China was one of the last holdouts that didn't allow that stuff to happen. But at the same time, they have all that social credit system already in place. So they've come at it with China in a different way. So now they're trying to get China on board with that stuff. Now they're trying to make China our enemy. Now they're it's China. You know, now it's, you know, it went from Russia to China. And it's, you know, Putin actually said to his people, come home to the land and soil. You know, that's one. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why they started targeting him. That's one of the. That was the whole Russia collusion thing. Because if they can make an enemy of Donald Trump, if they could make an enemy of Putin, and they can make enemies between China and Russia and America, then what do you have? You have a billion people or more, you know, they're pissed off at America and pissed off at Russia, who's right next door. And, you know, and their technology and their ability to mass produce stuff and get on top of manufacturing of many things, right? Including things that include rare earth minerals, you know, like neodymium magnets and things like that, because those things are a precious commodity in the upcoming future with all this computer stuff and electric cars and you know what I mean? There's so much underneath the surface of all the discussions that most people miss, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, when I saw those ghost cities just sitting there and It started, why are they there? Why did they build these things? But
so you reckon it was a plan that's gone awry then? Something that wasn't followed through, that's just had to be put on hold?
yeah, there are a lot of projects that got put on hold in 2008 with the mortgage collapse, or anytime they tank the economy, even some of their own projects suffer for a period of time.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to know everything, and I may be wrong about some of the things. A lot of it is speculation based on what I see without all of the facts. And there's always multiple narratives being spun, so it's really hard to get at the actual truth of a backdoor group of people's actual intentions.
Yeah. Well, you're trying to infer knowledge that is not explicitly stated by the precepts, isn't it? It's this logic inference. There's only so much information available to you, and you've got to take that information and from that make connections between them that allow you to infer information that's not necessarily there, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the only way to actually get to the backstory of anything when it's fully implemented is to reverse engineer it and see what steps were taken, who was involved, and really who benefits from it.
Mm-hmm. The only way that happens is once we get on top of this, though, right? Yeah. We've got to get all the information, and there's too much things hidden at the moment for us to be able to actually do that. And again, like, we've got to get to this place where we can place the importance of actually communicating ideas between us as being the most important thing whenever we engage in discussions like this, and whatever it is, this will be even more important as it comes to actually building our own ways of self-governance, is again placing that ability to actually understand properly what another person's saying before trying to decide whether what they're saying is right or wrong. Because that's the big flaw at the moment, I think, in conversation, is that people come from the position that what they're saying is right, rather than coming from a position of trying to understand what the other person is saying first.
Right.
I've had arguments with people where we've been, arguing about something for about 10 minutes before we realised that we actually believed the same thing. We just described it slightly differently.
Yep, I've had that a lot.
Like, how can we say the same thing here? Like, so when you say that, you mean this? Yeah. Well, when I say that, I mean this. Oh, right. So we just have different definitions of the words then. Yeah. And it's sometimes taking a moment when you hear something that you don't necessarily agree with to say, well, what do you actually mean by that? I'm going to bring up just a little bit from this post to try and draw us back towards it. If we consider the question, how many cows do we have? Based on that question alone, with no contextual information, you could ask a million questions before even being able to answer the question, if that makes sense. So, I mean, first we've got to define the terms. Who is we? Is it you and me personally? Is it we the people? Is it we the intelligent expressions of the all across all time? And secondly, you've got to consider, like, what is a cow? Is it one specific breed of cow? Is it a moose, or is it a buffalo cows? What do you mean by have? Like, does it have to be alive at this very moment right now? Can I have it butchered in my fridge? Does that still count as a cow? Do you mean have access to as and when we need it? How do you want me to count them? Do you want me to count it exactly, approximately? Head of cattle, number of herds, weight of cattle is enough a good enough answer for you? Like, all based on that one question: how many cows do we have? In order to answer it, you've got to make a whole bunch of assumptions about what the person actually means, because that sentence is not specific enough without the context, right?
Right.
And that's one of the big flaws that we have with English, is that it is this wonderfully poetic language, and it allows us to tap into so many concepts, and it's very flexible. It allows us to use words in ways they were never intended. Like, have you ever considered the whole idea of a taste being sharp? Like, you're thinking of, when you say sharp, most people think of something that is pointy that could stab you or could cut.
Right.
But, you sharp in terms of a sound or sharp in terms of a taste. It's the same word and it's the same ethereal concept, but applied to a different material description. Does that make sense? And that, again, that's the beauty of English, but it's also one of the biggest flaws, particularly when it comes to describing things where detail is important. Yeah.
Yeah. That cheddar was sharp. I cut my tongue.
Yeah, well, exactly. But anyone who's a foodie would understand the idea of a sharp flavor.
Yep.
Someone, again, who isn't really a foodie and doesn't pay that much attention to the intricacies of tastes wouldn't understand maybe what it meant for something to taste sharp. They might understand sour, but they wouldn't necessarily understand sharp.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I can describe tastes as, I'm really, really into my cooking. So I can describe tastes as being quite full. And my girlfriend's got no idea what I mean when I'm saying, like, that gives me a nice full mouthfeel. It feels like it's tickling all the parts of my palate enough. Do you know what I mean? You get this rounded overall kind of experience from it without anything standing out too much.
So because we are sensual beings, part of the diversity of our language is really all about the fact that we have a multiplicity of senses. There are tangibles and intangibles, and a lot of the intangibles are things that have to be somehow described, whether they're poetic or whether they're some form of ethereal. There's a subtlety of life that is it defies any kind of binary construct. It's impossible to reduce to.
Language is inadequate for it, right?
Right. That's why I love the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, because it speaks about some very specific things, but it also you can see the pressure that's on the people that agreed to it and stood up for it. You can almost taste it and touch it.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean that's the essence of language, isn't it? It's taking these things that are ethereal, fundamentally ethereal in their nature, because if you consider like the beginning of a thought, it doesn't begin with words. It begins with an intuition, right? Mm-hmm. It begins with something that has no words. There's a divine inspiration. It's almost like looking at it doesn't have form until you give it form by trying to describe it in terms of language. Before that it exists, it's there. The idea of love is like a fundamental thing in the universe. If we didn't have a word for it, love would still exist. But by being able to describe it, we can have different kinds of love, and we can make it more real just by the application of language, and more tangible, more material. And without that, you struggle to bring that intuitive sense of something into the material world, right?
Right.
So, it said it right in the beginning of the post here. Language gives form to the formless and solidity to the ethereal. It empowers the communication of reason, intent, and understanding. Without it, our thoughts have no substance. Concepts such as love, justice, and freedom are nothing more than feelings, a psycho-spiritual energy with an undetermined and indescribable flavor or odor. And again, I've used those words because flavors they're quite an indistinct and personal thing, aren't they? And odors, again, they're quite indistinct in terms of like it's not like something solid that you can touch.
Oh, but it's a portal. It's definitely a portal. The olfactory sensory mechanism, it can literally transport you back in time in a split second to a very specific relationship, a very specific location, a very specific dish, and that's inextricably linked to your taste buds, your sense palette, because those two work very closely together. So yes, I can remember things based on a smell in an instant, and
it's very visceral, isn't it? In a way that nothing else is. A smell or a taste can.
Yeah,
it's so visceral, isn't it? When it happens, it literally transports you to a moment that could have been decades ago.
Yep.
And it get a much more tangible reaction to it than you might to say hearing a song or seeing something that you remember seeing when you were young. You're right. They are portals, very, very much so. And again, I think it's because it taps into that intuitive nature of that which is the genesis of everything. It's that intuition, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. So when I say things on Facebook or not Facebook, on Lawful Bank where something doesn't pass my smell test, it's for a good reason. I've been here before. I've heard that before. I've smelled this before.
Yeah. You're tapping through the words to the spirit, aren't you? Because this is where, you've got to. And this is why it's so important to actually know the person you're trying to converse with and the better you know them, the more easy you are to communicate, the more easy it is to communicate with them, because our understanding of what words mean and, our definitions come so much from our experiences and things that we have, been through in life and the positions that we hold. The one I use all the time is the term God. When I say God, I'm not talking about a bearded man in the sky, because you know me. But if I were to say that to a complete stranger, they might think I was, a hardline Christian or a Muslim or whatever. And those contextual clues are so important for that understanding. Because again, that definition is fluffy for so many people, and those words can mean different things to different.
Yeah, I've heard it in different contexts. From sitting in AA meetings and their definition of the acronym God as a group of drunks or a good orderly direction. And you think about it, that society has maintained and flourished without any kind of central control or governance. Their whole thing is really about, our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. They keep themselves alive, and their principles keep that society alive. Because they don't engage in outside interference and outside opinions and outside stuff. They have their own problems, and it's a very diverse group of people that, in all other intents and purposes, wouldn't ordinarily mix. Yeah. But they, like other people, have this word, God, that they're familiar with, and they've made use of it in a way that works for them collectively and individually. It's when one person walks into that environment, and this applies to any situation. It's when one person walks into that environment and tries to impose their particular view on the whole of the general idea of it, that conflict kind of comes into play. So,
well, interesting. You should bring up AA as a group, because what I find quite interesting about that, and you're saying that once it's persisted without really any outside influence for a very long time, but the whole basis of that group is taking responsibility for yourself.
That it is.
That's what it's built on. It's built on the basis of sovereignty. You don't have anyone else to blame for what's going on in your life but yourself, and you're the only one who can change that. and we'll all be here to hold your hand and help you through it, but you've got to do the things that need to be done.
Yeah, and if we're honest and we're actually recovering ourselves, we're going to tell you the truth, even if you don't like it, because we love you. It's just that
it's very similar sort of situation, isn't it, to what we're doing now? We're trying to get a bunch of authority addicts off their hit of being told what to do.
it's a trick. It's a tricky thing. One thing that you did mention, and this really kind of is really important when it comes to words. There's because we have opinions, and because we have our direct personal experience, how we describe certain things is really sometimes it's the problem in how we're trying to assert our personal experience as being a definitive. And it's for me, it's always been about, revelation it just happens. It's not some event that takes place in the future or something that's unfolding right now that we're all experiencing. It's revelation is always happening. So more is revealed to anybody if they're looking for it in their life, and it's usually manifest in their life in the scenarios that are unfolding for them. They just see things differently for the first time, and in that they learn something and they grow from it. Maybe they'll get a little bit of humility, and maybe they'll listen more and talk less, or maybe they'll contribute more instead of hoarding up for themselves. And it really all depends on where each and every person is in their life and their stages of growth and development. If you're a selfish person at heart and you have lessons to learn in that, maybe part of that is sharing more. Maybe part of that is sharing less and listening more. It depends on the habits that go along with those character defects. You know what I mean? We all have them. We'd hardly be human if we didn't have those character defects. But if we're looking to grow and we're looking to learn the truth for ourselves, our own destiny as an individual, then those things will come out, because those are the things we're looking for. That's the direction we're walking in. We're walking towards the light. When you're walking towards the light, you know what? Here's the thing. When you're walking towards the light, your shadow is always beneath you and behind you. It's the minute you turn around and start walking back away from the light is where you see this tall shadow out in front of you, and it's in front of you. And once it's in front of you, that's what you're confronted with. So you get to a point where you can't turn around because the only thing you're going to be facing is your own shadow.
Yeah.
And that could just be you're isolated and alone and out of sync with everybody else, or it could be you see your shadow self in everybody around you, and it's just being mirrored back at you. And the only way to deal with that is to confront it right then and there in your shadow, or turn around and start walking back towards the light.
You should mention the shadow in other people, because I've heard it said, and I think it was Carl Jung, that said the things that piss you off about other people are the things you don't like about yourself. And the reason they piss you off is because you see the things you don't like about yourself, your shadow side, blatantly reflected back to you in the actions of others, and that's why their actions annoy you.
Yeah.
And I can get on board with that a lot. So let's get this wrapped up. We've been on the stream for a couple of hours now, and I just want to end it with a little thought experiment that I thought would be interesting for people to take away from this. And it is described in the post on Lawful Bank. Again, you'll find links in the description if you're watching this on YouTube at a later date. But I want us all to just sort of think about the role of language in thought here for a moment. And I want you to imagine I want you to go into a quiet place where you're not going to be disturbed. And I want you to try and observe your thoughts without using language to define them. And I want you to just sit with that and try and hold on to a thought without using language. And then sit with the results of that experiment and consider how important your ability to use language is to your ability to construct thoughts and to have rational and logical thoughts, which will allow you to solve problems and not just generate fear. I'm going to knock it on the head here. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, if indeed you still are. Thank you very much to Gary Mead. Say good night, Gary.
Have a good night, folks. Thanks for having me, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Take care of yourselves, guys. Don't forget to stay free, think free, and act free. And as always, I'll see you next time.